Today we'll learn about module 6, and module 6 is on hormones and neurotransmitters, very heavily biology based. And I hope that there are some things that you might have learned here and there, so it might just be really, really interesting, especially because many of you are in allied health. So what we will learn in this week is, first of all, what are hormones and what are the functions that they can perform. Also identifying the features for neurotransmitters. What are their structural features? What are their functions? All of that. And then also we would like to list the enzymes that are commonly found. And we have done some of these in week 5. So hopefully this will going to be, something that you can connect. So what we learned in, module 5 is that, first of all, we spend the initial half of the coursework learning about carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. And so we came to the point where we have finished learning about all the macromolecules. And we have also learned about, of course, we have also learned about the nomenclature. So we are in a good position now to learn about different things in body that are using or concepts from macromolecules, so they are made up of macromolecules, of course. So when we think of hormones, we kind of have an idea of what this is. Hormones is a term that a lot of people are aware of. They are sometimes they are small molecules, sometimes they are proteins that are produced in one part of the human body, but they're released into circulation to regulate something else. So it doesn't have to be something that wherever it is produced, it's acting there. So you can understand if something has to make that kind of impact, then it can coordinate activities of several tissues and organs. So let's look at this picture carefully. And you can see that there is a cell that's producing a hormone. It can go through the blood vessel to a target cell, and it can act on the target cell. So essentially, it can definitely make an impact elsewhere. So with that basic understanding, it's not hard to imagine that it can regulate a lot of activities, from blood pressure to how there is an electrolyte balance, how it regulates the development of human body, the sexual differentiation, till up to, I think, to 6 weeks or something. There is no difference between a boy and girl. But then, the SRY gene in male fires up and starts causing the differentiation. Then there is development, reproduction. That the puberty is something that happens only at a certain age, and so that's regulated by hormones. So all of these are practical examples, and even things like hunger or eating behavior and digestion, all of this is controlled to a large extent by hormones. So if you see here, there is it can cause a desired response. It can be increased in response to something, and it can result in a response inside the cell. And you can see that this little thing on the top, this is the hormone. Let me try to get the pointer here. Yeah, so that can be a messenger molecule. It could be a hormone. It could be a drug that can impact the receptor. Now, if you remember from your knowledge of macromolecules, receptors are proteins and surface is primarily lipids. So you're always, thinking as a biochemist, you always think of these macromolecules and their applications. Okay, so what is the difference between enzymes and hormones? Very different. Enzymes are something, they are right there, they're in their present, they are active, they are actively interacting with the substrate, and they are acting on the substrate to make product. So we saw this example, especially for activation energy, maltose getting broken into glucose. That's what the enzymes do. They speed up the reaction. Whereas hormones, they are quite different. They're produced in one part, and they are triggering reaction in another part. So it's going to be definitely different than enzymes, even though sometimes people use these words like, okay, they are impacting the human body, but in a very different way. Okay, so we are going to start learning about this with the beginning to look at neuroendocrine system, and the coordination of entire metabolism in mammals is regulated by this system. Okay, so you can see that there are two words here. There is a nervous system, the neuro word, and the endocrine word. So these are the two different systems that interact between each other, and they are resulting in a lot of different body regulations and activities and changes. So neuroendocrine describes cells that are released in hormones into the blood in response to stimulus by the nervous system. So one is the one that is initiating, and the other is actually responding and sending those signals. So it is, it is, there is a hypothalamus, and what it does, it's actually maintaining the overall homeostasis. It's regulating reproduction, metabolism, eating, drinking, a lot of these habits. And so this is really important that for hormonal balance, that the right amount is being released. And we will study about things that happen if it's not. So we talked about this word homeostasis, and let's see what this actually means. So that having the state of a person to be in a normal or a regulated manner is homeostasis. And there can be a lot of changes. There can be temperature changes, food changes. There can be, body may be subjected to so many different things. And body should be able to still use hormones or different things in human body to keep it regulated. And sometimes these changes can affect cellular or organism level, but homeostasis is what we call the maintenance of stable internal state. So now if we carefully look at this system, which is the nervous system and the endocrine system, and we try to define what do people who study neuroendocrinology, what do they study? They're studying the interaction between the nervous system and the endocrine system. And, as someone in allied health field, this is something that that you might come across, because especially if you're a nursing student, you might come across things which are related to endocrinology or nervous system or both. And so that's the kind of signal that is shown here. There is a nerve impulse. It travels via the target cells to different parts. It can cause different reaction. And that's the, that's the part of the nervous neuronal signaling, the signal transmitting to different parts. And the endocrine is the hormonal part in which it goes to different parts and causes the trigger, the reaction. So if we think of this system in the entirety, it takes input from the environment all the time. And then there is, the central nervous system has the hypothalamus. It releases the hormones, which will directly impact the pituitary gland. So there is anterior pituitary, and it can release all these different types of hormones. If you see here, you don't have to look at MR. We can just look at the names for now. Corticotropin, which is also called ECTH, thyrotropin, FSH, LH, somatotropin, and prolactin. All of these are released by the pituitary. And then there is a posterior pituitary, and they release these other set of hormones, and we're going to see there, how they impact by, releasing oxytocin and vasopressin. Now, what do these do? They have secondary targets. They act on these other, little organs where they are going to result in release of the second set of hormones, that is cortisol, thyroxine, progesterone, testosterone, all of these. And ultimately, they reach to all the different parts of the body. If you can see here, you can see most of them are listed over here. And so this is something that we're going to see a little bit more in detail. Similarly, the blood glucose level is controlled, is controlled by pancreas. which is having an interplay of other hormones that we have learned about before, that are insulin and glucagon, somatostatin. Okay, so we are going to take a look at this separately, so we can just kind of dissect it out and clarify it for ourselves. So there are two parts in the nervous system. One is the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And when we talk about the endocrine system, there is an information signaling system, and there are different kinds of glands which are labeled on this on this figure, so that you can really appreciate that kind of throughout the body. Okay, and these glands will result in the production of hormones. So nervous system is releasing the signals, which is actually resulting in those molecules to be, to hit the glands, which then can produce hormones. And then, as we said, they can regulate many things. So when we talk about glands, let's focus on what exactly is a gland. It's an organ which secretes particular chemical substance for use in the body. So there's a specific gland can release only specific things. And then they are also not just one type, there are 3 different types. So, okay, looks like there is some kind of a confusion here. I see. Looks like there is a, let us see. Give me 1 second, let me check. I have to update the PowerPoint. I think I've switched it. That's what I was thinking. Let me go back to the PowerPoint and to this point. And I think it's best if I do it like this. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know how this happened. And good, I noticed. Okay, so now it is fixed. So exocrine glands are the glands that secrete their product into ducts, and endocrine glands are the ones that secrete them into blood rather than through a duct, because they can directly release it into the bloodstream. And heterocrine, hetero is always for things that are a combination of both, so they can perform both exocrine as well as endocrine function. So let me just say this one more time. If they are releasing their products into the ducts, then they are exocrine. And if they're releasing, endo is kind of internal within itself, so it is like directly releasing into the blood, then that would be an example of an exocrine gland. So we are going to take a look at these, but before we take a look at these, what these glands are secreting, it's important to know what are the different types of hormones, especially since it's a biochemistry class. We would like to make sure that we understand what are these hormones actually made up of. So there is proteins. Of course, proteins we know can serve as, can have many different functions. So one of them is, serving as hormones. And then there are lipids, and these can also act as hormones. And we talked about this when we were doing the lipids chapter. If you remember, we talked that there are steroids which can act as hormones, and which are the primary messengers, and they can be derived from cholesterol or from different kinds of sterols. So that's one of them. So what you see on the figure here, just clarifying, the first one is for proteins. This kind of structure is always a protein structure. The second one, the structure is shown here. And the third one, which is tyrosine derivatives. And these are produced by thyroid gland, and these are, we will talk about them. They are fight or flight kind of hormones. They're epinephrines. So these are the three different types of hormones based on how the chemistry is. Not everything is a lipid, not everything is a protein, or just amino acid based. There are three different varieties. So these are the glands that cover the endocrine system. So we talked about endocrine, exocrine, and heterocrine. So we are just going to start with endocrine system: pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal gland, pancreas, and thymus gland. As you already know, probably, I'm really not a big fan of focusing on memorizing stuff. It's more on understanding. So I don't think I would ever give you a question like list all the 6 glands in endocrine system. Okay. So we'll start with the first one, which is like super important, pituitary gland, and it is situated in the middle of the skull. It is an endocrine gland which controls the function of various glands and maintains overall hormone levels in the body. So how does it do that? So there is, in the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, there are so many different hormones being produced. There is growth hormone, prolactin, thyroid stimulating, adrenocorticotropic, follicle stimulating, and luteinizing. All of these hormones are produced in the anterior lobe. So you can say that the productivity of the anterior lobe is like there is like so much happening, like literally. You can see here, and all of those are kind of mentioned over here. Now, what about the posterior lobe? So I'll come to the intermediate, but the posterior lobe is making vasopressin and oxytocin. So these are the 2 different hormones that the posterior lobe is making, and they are very different. They're very different from the anterior lobe. And finally, there is an intermediate lobe, there is A and B melanocyte stimulating hormones. So these are all the different hormones being produced. And good we are doing this ahead, because this chapter does take a little bit of time to kind of get through all the information, and I think that it will help you once you're reading. So growth hormone, as the name implies, is responsible for growth of bones, cartilage, and connective tissue. So they can be responsible for skeletal and bone growth. How does that happen? Because they are controlling another set of molecules which are responsible for skeleton and bone growth. And then on protein metabolism, they result in increased calcium absorption, and so there is increased mineral metabolism, and these can impact carbohydrates, fat metabolism. So that this growth hormone can affect protein, mineral, carbohydrate, or fat metabolism. All of these different things, and can impact the growth. It's not just human, it's valid for most of the mammals too. And what can happen if the growth hormone is, not functioning properly? So you probably would have seen some of these pictures as part of Guinness Book of World Record. There is one guy who here is 8 feet, and the other one, the shortest, which is 2 feet, who is 2.5 feet. And you know that it's characterized by tall stature. They can have other features. Of course, you can see there is a really large hands and feet. On the other hand, the dwarfism is deficiency, and then causes a shortness of stature, and similar. It's kind of easy to understand. Also, it can lead to acromegaly, and it is characterized by broad, thick nose, thickening of the skin, prominent brow, and then elongation and widening of the mandible. So these are all the different things that can happen. 1, 2, 3 diseases related to growth hormone. Then next week we are going in the sequence. I just wanted to tell you, we are following this exact sequence and trying to go down and address them one by one from pituitary. So the second one here is prolactin, which plays an important role in mammary gland and in milk synthesis. And it acts via, it's acts because of stimulating prolactin releasing factors, and sometimes it can be exercise, emotional stress, breastfeeding. They can be so many different factors. And then there can be inhibitory factors like hypothalamus can prevent the release of prolactin. Then there is thyroid stimulating hormone. It stimulates thyroid to produce thyroxine and triiodothyronine. And these are, again, all of this is pituitary, and you're looking at the anterior part. There is ACTH, which is the adrenocorticotropic hormone, and it is secreted again by the anterior pituitary gland and it responds to the biological stress. And its effect is that it results in increasing of corticosteroids to counteract for the stress. So if you see here, it has this feedback loop. More stress results in more corticosteroids, and less stress has a negative impact. So if there is, it can result in less stress, more stress is more release, and then negative feedback. If there is no stress, then there is no prompt no release of or low release of corticosteroids. Then the next one is FSH by anterior pituitary gland, and it regulates the development growth of the female body. Also the LH, which is similarly involved in the, it helps in ovulation and development of corpus luteum. And in males, what it does, it helps in stimulating the production of testosterone. So these are all like heavily feedback loop oriented. There is hypothalamus, which can promote or like tell the pituitary, no, don't do it, or it can help pituitary make more and more hormones. So you can see here, there's the testosterone here, and this can result in estrogen and progesterone. Then comes that intermediate part of the pituitary gland, not the anterior or posterior, and that's where the alpha melanocyte stimulating and beta melanocyte hormones are produced. And what do? Is they induce the production of melanin in skin and hair, and they can have an effect in other things too, but major role is to induce the production of melanin. Now, antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, or vasopressin, this is what is produced by the the posterior part, and it has the function is that for it, the main thing, it's, of course, the name makes it obvious. It's diuretic, means to retain water in the body and to constrict the blood vessels. So it is synthesized in the cells of supraoptic nucleus. It's a specific kind of cell, and then it's stored in the posterior pituitary gland. So what can be the disease related to vasopressin? It can be diabetes insipidus. You might have heard about it or may not have. It's a condition characterized by a lot of thirst and excretion of a large amount of water, because the inability to kind of keep water in there. And also polyuria, excessive or abnormally large production of urine. Then comes I believe this is the last one, oxytocin. Oxytocin is synthesized by in the hypothalamus again, but where is it stored? Again, in the posterior lobe of pituitary gland. And it results in contraction of mammary gland to produce milk. So these are both related to, like, one is related to water, the other related to milk, and it results in the contraction of smooth muscles of the uterus. So these so it's kind of shown over here that both of these, the one that we were talking about, ADH, which acts on the kidney, and oxytocin, which acts on the mammary glands and the uterine muscles, and both are in the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. So with this, we finish the pituitary gland, and we go to the next one, which is the thyroid gland. And that has two hormones. One is thyroxine, another is triiodothyronine. So also there is calcitonin. So what are their functions? Their primary functions are that they are resulting in metabolism regulation. And there is something, if you remember, like they say, like always have the iodized salt, because they cannot be made when there are no iodines available. And that's one of the reasons that can cause, the imbalance can cause hypo or hyperthyroid and can result in excessive release of hormones or low release of hormones, right? So these can be controlled by the um, again by the pituitary lobe uh, of the thyroid stimulating hormones, and this is T3 is more effective and T4 is more abundant. So these are what does the calcitonin does? Well, the orange one is all the T4 and T3, and the calcitonin is this green one. It decreases blood calcium levels and blood phosphate levels, and it is controlled by blood calcium levels and digestive chemicals. If there is a feedback loop that can make increase more. So essentially, the hormones are not just acting unidimensionally. They are not just being produced. There is also a feedback mechanism that is helping to stop or increase production. So those problems that we were just talking about, they're listed here. There is hyperthyroidism, where there is hyperactivity and sensitivity to heat, and it is caused by sometimes due to an autoimmune problem. And it is that when it is triggered by an autoimmune problem, it is called Graves' disease. There is hypothyroidism, in which people have lower levels or lower activity of thyroid, and so there is lesser production of hormones, which means lower metabolic rate, sensitivity to cold, and in infant it causes cretinism, which is like, of course we know that if there is lower activity, lower production of hormones, it can result in lesser growth. It can affect the development and then abnormal bone formation. There is also Hashimoto's disease, and this is because when there is autoimmune system problem, then it can be resulting in hypothyroidism, just like excessive can, in case of hyperthyroidism, is resulted by an autoimmune problem, then it's called Graves' disease. And so these are all some things that can be that are, I guess, hard to eliminate. And I mean, of course, there are treatments, but they are hard to, it's kind of hard to, eliminate completely. So sometimes there is another disease which is called goiter. No T3 and T4 can be made because not enough iodides were ingested. So it's only very rarely, like if you think of thinking of areas where getting salt from, let us say, from a specific source which doesn't have iodine or doesn't have supplemented iodine, then this happens. Then comes the adrenal gland, which is actually located in very near to the kidneys, right on top of it, and it can carry out separate functions. So it has two regions. One of them is that there is, there is adrenal medulla, which secretes amine. So there is norepinephrine and epinephrine produced in different percentages. Epinephrine is 80%, norepinephrine is 20%. And this adrenal medulla, it kind of acts like an endocrine organ and secretes many hormones, such as aldosterone, cortisol, and sex hormones. And at least the aldosterone, it's called mineral corticoid because it regulates the electrolyte level. And that's the reason, because it's controlling the sodium and potassium levels. Similarly, cortisol, it's considered a glucocorticoid. It regulates glucose concentration within the meals at normal range. So all of these hormones play an incredibly important role. It's not just the enzymes, because enzymes do help in speeding up the reaction, but these help in maintaining homeostasis, that control of the overall body and how the body functions. I'm kind of halfway through. So then comes the pancreas. We are, like we say, we continue our journey into different kinds of glands. And we are always, whenever we are thinking of these glands, we are always thinking, are these endocrine? So endocrine is in blood. That's the within internal. And, the way I remember always is endo is internal blood, and, exo is external. So it kind of into the glands. So we are only going to be worrying about endocrine in this part, and there are 3 different types of cells. It's extremely important. It's something that you should, you know, definitely you might already know. There are there are 3 different types of cells, and each make a different hormone. And collectively, they regulate the blood glucose level. So they are arranged into groups called islets of Langerhans, and there is alpha cells, makes glucagon, there is beta cells, insulin, and then the last one, delta cells, is somatostatin. So they are directly related to, like I said, blood glucose levels, and they are the ones that are directly related to, of course, the when there is someone suffering from diabetes. So that's why pancreas is so important, because of these 3 cells, alpha, beta, and delta cells, making glucagon, insulin, and SS. So what does actually glucagon do? This is one of my, I really like this slide. Glucagon works on the liver. They kind of act opposite to each other. Glucagon works on the liver, and it increases the production of glucose. So it's like make more glucose, make more glucose. Okay. And how does that happen? Because it's results in breakdown of glycogen, and production of glucose. So if you see here, whenever there is low glucose level, then the pancreas releases more and more glucagon. Okay. Now we just looked at this, and glucagon is secreted by alpha cells. So it kind of tells to alpha cells, hey, we need more glucagon, and it's released in the blood. It releases more glucose in the blood and try to achieve the level. So it's compensating for the low level by secreting and getting it back to a good level. Now, insulin, on the other hand, is like opposite. It tells the liver to remove the glucose. Okay? So it is making glycogen, and it is preventing gluconeogenesis, and then it prevents hyperglycemia. Okay, so if you have high blood glucose level, insulin is released by beta cells, and then this results in uptake of glucose for glycogen production, and releasing it, making it normal level. So glucagon and insulin have different or opposite ways of acting, I would say, and they kind of have to be for a body to function normally. Of course, they have to be both have to be actively present. So glucagon and insulin work in opposition. The combined effects control blood glucose. Sometimes the blood glucose is high, then we need the insulin. When it's low, we need the glucagon. So again, this slide clearly clarifies how when there is excessive insulin, when the body is well fed, the insulin would dominate. There's glucose oxidation, glycogen synthesis, fat synthesis, protein synthesis. And when the body is fasted, then there is glucagon, because it's like releasing that excess glycogen, which is storing glucose, and it is bringing it to making it released. So one of the also reasons why this is my I really love this slide is because or this concept is because you see we are utilizing glucose and glycogen concepts from carbohydrates. We are also looking at how there is presence of fat cells in here, and then eventually we are talking about how these hormones are controlling the levels of carbohydrates, basically the monosaccharide and polysaccharides inside human body. So that interplay, so that's now in the final modules, we have now come to really appreciate how these different things actually help. And of course, we didn't talk about enzymes here, but everything that you talk about metabolism or synthesis involves enzymes, and which is nothing but proteins. We essentially, everything that we have studied kind of comes together when we talk about human body. So types of diabetes, there is there are 2 types of diabetes, as you might know already. There is type 1 and type 2. And if there is in case of type 1 diabetes, the pancreas, there is decreased insulin in blood vessels, and as a result of which there is increase in glucose level, because there is not so much insulin, right? And then the muscle is unable to use the glucose, and then causes, glycogen breakdown can cause ketoacidosis. So that's type 1 diabetes, which is happens sometime even when people, when human beings, when they're very, young, even then it can happen. And then, okay, hold on for a second. Let me close the door. Sorry about that. Okay, so type 2 diabetes, on the other hand, there is enough insulin, okay, but the utilization is not good. Muscle is not able to use glucose due to insulin resistance. So it's not like, it's different from type 1, because it's not like there is less insulin, but it's not getting used because it's the cells are resistant to insulin. So there is the difference between these two, and of course it's linked directly to the hormone insulin. Then comes the next gland, which is the pineal gland. We spend a substantial time on pancreas, talking about, insulin and glucagon. So pineal gland, so it secretes only one hormone, melatonin. That's really, really important. So melatonin decreases, secretion decreases during the daytime and increases at nighttime, and it's responsible for the sleep. And circadian rhythms are like one of my, like, really, I guess, favorite topics. And that there is people who cannot sleep, and then there's melatonin is available. That hormone, itself is available on stores as 1 milligram, 3 milligram, 5 milligram, 10 milligram, different tablets which people can take, and it can help people fall asleep. So it's melatonin is involved in longer rhythms, and it's also important for other, not just sleep. It's also believed to be involved in menstrual cycle and onset of puberty. So it's really an important hormone. Okay, next we'll go to other endocrine glands such as thymus, which secretes thymosin. For WBC productions, there is reproductive glands, which also result in production of sex hormones. And it's a subject by itself. As you can see, we're just touching, we're like, literally, this is the top of the iceberg. Then comes the neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers. What they do is they transmit signals from neuron to a target cell across a synapse. So that's the interesting thing. And you can see the synapse, that like there's this little gap here on the right side on the figure in the inset. So there is neurotransmitters which are present here, which are released, and they travel across the synapse, which is nothing but a little gap. And they are encountered by the receptor, which can then carry out some action. And so neurotransmitters, they're packaged into synaptic vesicles, and they are then released to impact a receptor. And what is shown over here is like the axon and how the electrical impulse, it's getting transmitted from neuron to other cells. So just a simplistic view of a chemical synapse, and for you to be able to understand that, hey, they're receiving or there are receptor receiving molecules or receptors, and it goes from one side to another. And there are a lot of different types of neurotransmitters. There are the ones that are excitatory, there are inhibitory, or they're both. Okay, that's where the fight or flight will come. We'll see what that means. Okay, so there is an excitation or excitatory ones. There is glutamate, aspartate, and nitric oxide. Now, I hope you remember that glutamate is nothing but the glutamic acid, and aspartate is nothing but the aspartic acid. Glycine, these are all amino acids, if you can recognize them, or some of them are variations of that. And so this is really important to know that amino acids are directly also acting as neurotransmitters. So the acetylcholine is the first one that we want to study because it was the first one to be discovered. And the structure is shown here. It is used by the nervous system, such as smooth muscles of the heart, as an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So it is responsible for stimulation of muscles, including that of gastrointestinal system, and it's used in brain. So it's a very important neurotransmitter, and you need that function, need for it to function properly. Then there is dopamine, and so it is associated with some kind of a reward mechanism in the brain. So you can see here, you eat sugar, you like it, you crave it, then the blood sugar levels spike, dopamine is released in the brain, and when it's released in the brain, insulin is secreted, and then blood sugar levels have to drop. And then when the blood sugar falls behind, it when there is high insulin level, it causes immediate fat storage, and body craves the lost sugar. So this results in low blood sugar levels and increased appetite and cravings, and then you eat more sugar, and then the dopamine is released, and it's kind of cycle. And so this is synthesized by in 3 steps from tyrosine. So again, appreciate that it's coming from a protein perspective, that one of the amino acids is responsible for synthesis, and it's involved in regulatory motor activity, like I said, in mood, motivation, and attention. And you'll be surprised to know that schizophrenic patients, they have too much dopamine, maybe you've learned about it. And then patients with Parkinson's have too little dopamine. Then comes norepinephrine, this is synthesized directly from dopamine. So, we just learned about dopamine, so it's synthesized from there. And it results it is a molecule that is precursor to epinephrine. And it is something that is strongly associated with our nervous system into high alert. Okay. So it increases our heart rate and blood pressure, and it is important in forming memory. So it's called the fight or flight response. Like you see something, and it results in increased heart rate, rapid breathing. So it's not like all like happening like by magic, but it's the release of norepinephrine, and it tells the nervous system, gosh, something crazy is happening, so you have to either fight it or run. Do one of them. So that's that. And then comes the glutamate, it's an amino acid. Of course, we know it's glutamic acid. It's again an excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. It's involved in learning and all cognition and everything. And it's formed from an intermediate of Krebs cycle. We didn't study Krebs cycle. Don't worry, this kind of question won't be there in the exam. But I mean, just for your reference, if you've studied about Krebs cycle and how ATP is produced. So there's only so much we can do in a 2-credit biochem course. So there is GABA, which is the gamma aminobutyric acid. It is synthesized from glutamate, and it's an inhibitory transmitter. So if you saw that, it was excitatory, and it can even make inhibitory, and it prevents the brain from becoming overexcited. And lack of it can result in epilepsy. There's serotonin. So all of these, you have to, the best way of doing it is, again, divide in 2 parts. Do the first part where you study all the pituitary hormones up to pituitary, and then kind of take a break and come back and do the rest. The serotonin is synthesized from tryptophan, again, an amino acid, and it regulates attention and cognitive function, even dreaming, eating, mood, pain regulation. You thought everything was in your control. There are hormones in your body that are controlling a lot of that. And too little serotonin can lead to depression or loss of animal control. So the neurotransmitter, they are synthesized. Like, how does this actually happen? They are synthesized from precursors. When they are synthesizing enzymes, they result in like making them. They're stored like that. If they are leaked, then they're destroyed because, they have no value. And then when there is an action potential, it causes the vesicle to fuse with synapse and release these transmitters. You can see that there's being like, it fuses here, this circle fused in here. And after it fuses, it releases that, which is binds to the receptor. And if it's lost, then, I mean, of course, it's destroyed. If there is a little bit remaining, there is postsynaptic receptors. I mean, it binds over there, and then it results in, if there is any released neurotransmitters that are they can be deactivated by or reuptake by enzyme degradation. So, I mean, there are degrading enzymes which are present. If they're not utilized, they can be destroyed. So just a little bit about how alcohols are related. So, you know, so what alcohols do is they directly bind to receptors for ACH, serotonin, GABA, and glutamate, and enhances the effect of GABA. And so what it does is when it enhances the GABA is inhibitory. We just read that GABA is inhibitory. So again, challenging would be which is inhibitory and which is excitatory. So remember this table. We always remember this table. So this is a table I would just take a picture or something, print out, and just put it like in front of myself and where I study. So it causes sluggishness, it causes decreased activity, and alcohol can inhibit also glutamate receptor function and cause disorientation and that lack of cohesion when you are talking, and memory disruptions and blackout. It also raises dopamine levels. So these three I talked about. I said GABA, glutamate, dopamine. Dopamine causes excitement. So at the same time, while you are sluggish, you're also quite excited, and it's like pleasurable experience while you are experiencing that you're not coordinated and you're just talking gibberish, right? So all of these three hormones are elevated, and neurotransmitters, they are elevated, and as a result of which the effect of alcohol is directly on the neurotransmitters. Sorry, I misspoke, not hormones, neurotransmitters. So nicotine, what does nicotine do? Okay, we know about nicotine. We know that people and sometimes people take cigarettes, or I guess light cigarettes or whatever, e-cigarettes. So nicotine imitates the action of ACH and binds to ACH receptor, and it leads to bursts of activity. So it can result in, again, release of glutamate, and also promotes dopamine release. And again, it creates a feeling of reward and pleasure. So whenever body lacks it, it will kind of look for it. And then nicotine, again, they want to have a cigarette, and then again, it releases to the burst and release, gets that pleasure feeling. So yeah, we don't want to fall into trap. Not everything needs to be tried once. Okay. So disease associated with neurotransmitter, these are the different diseases. You can kind of go through them. We sort of went through them, not in detail, but they can lead in all these different diseases, which I'm sure you might have heard of, but you haven't really linked them to neurotransmitters. So, I mean, it's a very, very brief preview. I just wanted to say that, and like I promised you, I didn't want to go really, really more than 5-10. There are a lot of terms which we studied today, and I know that you will take some time. So please take that time and kind of go through these terms, and you might have to go through them again and again. So with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop recording. Now let us see. Can't even find. Oh, right here.